first instructor at Washington State made us pull every handle directly off the pot. And we did that for a long time. I pull them partially. And I'll talk about it more when I do the teapot, but I'll get pretty well started. And then I'll decide where I'm cutting that off and how much of that I'm going to use. I always say this jokingly, and I'm sure you've heard it before, but it's really nice if you put the handle directly behind the spout.
Next to the bottom of the handle, below the top of the handle. Oh,
When I was sharing my studio, Pat Horsley and I were sharing studio, we were making, I'll say, similar pots, not the same pots by any means. We were making a lot of casseroles and that sort of thing. And we had entirely different schedules. I'm an early riser. I was up at 4:30 this morning, and I've always been that kind of person. You get me about 8:30, boy, there's not much left. You know, it's grinding down. So Pat's the other kind of person. Would get to the studio 10:30, 11, and he might stay till late at night. So, but we're making these pots, and we're both making casseroles, and I've put all the things together. The knobs are on the lids, the strap handles are on the sides of the casseroles. I'm done. I'm leaving. It's 4:30, and Pat got it in his head that, you know, maybe I'm going to go home early today. And where he always put the strap handles on his pieces, he had a shelf, and he had maybe 15 casseroles up there, and he always had the pot facing him like this, and you put the handles on, and you just go from one to the other very methodically, and he would always do one step and then do the next step. I always completed each pot. So I'm leaving, and he decides he's leaving too, and so he left, because he just finished putting all those handles on, but he hadn't put the handles on the other side.
Oh, no.
So it came in the next morning with a 15 or 20 casseroles that had a handle on one side. And it's all related. Nothing's worse than getting things wrong that way. Anyway, I'm going to attach this. And I'm going to take the time to really make sure it's well attached. Because when I actually start pulling the handle again, it's going to be very quick, very short. I don't want to labor too much on it. If you are laboring at making your handles, oftentimes you lose the strength in the clay that's necessary to keep the handle in a nice, springy sort of form. So I'm going to take a look at it. I always am pretty brutal about this in a way. I'll start pulling the handle, and I'll drag my nail through, and then I'll close up each side. So I've gone through and I've drug my thumb down, and then very softly come back and close that line back up. But this handle is just about done. It needs to be that scale, that thickness, that weight. And as I always tell my students, be sure to score the bottom connection, and then I never do. So always score the bottom connection. I'll give it just a little bit of a lift. I also have these little, I'll call them issues, about different things and the way things come together. And I more often than not will put a little thumb thing there, and I don't think it actually there as a functional element for me. It's there more as a visual. It's filling a space I always thought was kind of clumsy. So I'm just taking a little piece of clay, setting it up there. Okay?
Great.
Nice.
And I will often, also, I should mention that I'll have a couple of brushes. I'm deadly with a sponge. I'm really heavy-handed, and I might come back and just touch up little things with a soft sponge rather than coming back and using, a soft brush rather than using a sponge. So I'm going to throw a teapot, the parts of it, and talk about it. And this is a complicated pot, and none of its parts are more than 2 pounds, and most of its parts are less than 1. So I want to clean up lingering stuff here. And I'll probably throw things or do things in a slightly different order. One is that I'm going to make the handle for the teapot first. Get it out of the way. I need it to set up.
Camera tipped.
We now have footage of concrete.
Very fast.
I make a pole handle for my teapots. And there is a kind of an evolution of thinking about this. When I first started making teapots, I made a lot of very traditional round teapots with back handles. There's a space issue thing as far as kiln firing is concerned, that you're playing with. I never really liked a lot of clay handles, that sort of thing, but over time I started making clay handles, and I wanted something in particular. I wanted some mass to it. It was at a time when everybody who was working in clay was buying extruders and trying all sorts of ways of extruding hollow handles and everything else. And I bought an extruder, and it's never had clay in it. It hangs in my studio space, and I've used the handle for drying towels out and that sort of thing. But I knew what I wanted, and I wanted something that had some mass to it, but I didn't want this big clunky gob of clay. So the handle is a pole handle, and as I can best describe it, it's like pulling and making a piece of celery. So I'm going to start pulling this handle, and then when I get it fairly well started, I'm going to take my thumb and I'm just going to really drag it through the back side. Can everybody see that? And then I may come back to it periodically, but I'm going to spend the rest of the time working on the upside of the handle. And because this isn't actually going to be the one I use, spends a little less time. That's that thing about fussing. You don't have to fuss on this one. I'm getting pretty close. And now I'm going to wrap it around this little cylinder of clay. And probably before I'm actually putting the teapot together, that might be a usable handle, because the bisque is just sucking water out of the inside.
So it's actually sealed together, the two
Yeah.
halves are sealed together.
I kind of lock them together, and what'll happen is that sometimes as it's drying, it'll start to tighten on the form, and you have to just cut it and get it to release.
Don, do you find yourself going back to like a particular cylinder for a particular, this is my scale of handles I like to use, or is it pretty much random?
Yeah, I've got, I never do make one of anything kind of thing. I've got probably 30 of those.
That groove